Welcome to another meet recap. If you haven't seen my previous meet recaps, the goal of this video is really just to kind of talk about a lot of the programming strategies, tapering strategy, also the meet day selections that went into prepping my client Anthony for his most recent meet. He competed at the New Jersey State Championships just a few weeks ago and went 5 for 9 with a 5 kilo meet PR. There was a lot to take away from this meet, so let's get straight into it. So Anthony is a 67.5 kilo lifter. He weighed in at 66 kilos or 145 pounds. This is his second meet, and this is our second meet working together. His last meet was in September of 2023, where he totaled 440 kilos or 970 pounds. He squatted 155 kilos or 341 pounds, benched 95 kilos or 209 pounds, and deadlifted 190 kilos or 418 pounds with a dot score of 349. This most recent meet, he totaled 445 kilos, which is 981 pounds. Squatted his meet PR 155 or 341 pounds. Benched his meet PR 95 kilos or 209 pounds. And deadlifted a 5 kilo PR of 195 kilos or 430 pounds with a dot score of 348. So definitely not exactly the meet that we had expected, but there was definitely a lot that went into this meet that made it so that Anthony couldn't necessarily put up the performance that he would want him to. Going into this meet, his best numbers in training were a 165 kilo squat or 363 pounds. He benched 100 kilos or 220 pounds and deadlifted 190 kilos or 418 pounds. So coming off of training, we were definitely expecting a much higher total than he actually hit, but we'll get into the reasons why that didn't happen a little bit later. Going into the programming, Anthony definitely had some very interesting programming going into the meet. Starting with squat, his squat was fairly simple, a very easy Wednesday session of just 3 sets of 4 on pause squat, some belt squat afterwards, and then on his Saturday session, he would have his primary, where he would have a single, another top triple, and then back down triples after that. A few blocks after his most recent meet, we saw his squat actually regress a pretty significant amount to the point where that he was failing his opener from his last meet for, a pretty easy pause double or pause triple. And we had to reassess his programming to kind of figure out why he was experiencing so much fatigue and why his numbers were regressing so much. And what we found was that his secondary day had actually progressed a little bit too far um, beyond a sustainable level of workload to the point where he wasn't necessarily able to perform well going into that primary day. So what we did instead was that we almost capped the secondary day at a particular weight, which ended up being around 275 pounds. We would kind of progress that throughout the block, but we were almost controlling the rate of progression on the secondary day to make sure that he would show up into the primary day feeling a little bit stronger. Now, with that being said, his squat was still showing up a little bit flat, so we knew that we definitely needed to add in a little bit more workload, which is where this second top set came in. So he would do a top single, he would do a top triple at around 90% of that top single, and then he would do 2 more sets of 3 at 86% of that top single. This would essentially make his primary day just a little bit more stressful than the secondary day, and he would have a little bit more of a polarized workload layout. Looking at bench press, Anthony bench presses 3 times a week. We were having a little bit of trouble trying to get the bench press to move, and I wasn't exactly sure whether or not to increase workload or decrease workload because Anthony is a lighter male. He has a pretty deep background in running cross country, so he has a pretty high work capacity. It would make sense that he would be able to manage a lot of workload, especially on bench press, which is the lift that allows for the most workload being done. But there were a lot of signs that he would actually respond to a little bit less workload and almost respond closer to a 2 times a week bench press approach. I had a feeling that he would respond to 2 times a week bench press, but I didn't want to make that change one block out from the meet. So we still stayed with 3 times a week bench pressing. We made one of the days relatively easy where he wasn't necessarily being challenged whatsoever. However, looking at his taper, it almost looked like he was benching twice a week. In the block prior, we had kind of changed his split up just slightly so that his primary bench day would land on the day that he competed on. And because of that, there was a week where he only bench pressed twice that week. And on his primary, he ended up showing up extremely, extremely strong. So leading into the meet, I almost re-ran that accidental 2 times a week benching, having him take his final bench on this Wednesday and just having it be his normal Wednesday bench session. And he showed up onto meet day extremely, extremely strong. Now, deadlift was the lift that kind of regressed the most for Anthony immediately after his meet. We were looking to use the programming to address some of the technical flaws that he had, but we almost went down the rabbit hole a little bit too far and got his programming a little bit too convoluted to the point where it wasn't productive whatsoever. You can see that this is a block back in December or January where he would be doing some Romanian deadlifts before doing only 2 sets of pause deadlifts on a secondary day. And then his primary day had a top triple followed by some back down sets of 4, and this did not work well whatsoever. About 2 blocks out from the meet, Anthony had probably one of his worst deadlift sessions that he's had in a while, and we had a small conversation about how it may actually be beneficial to almost overhaul his training. Now, this isn't necessarily a strategy that I would recommend for almost anyone, but at the time, just judging based off of the momentum that we had and the current state of his current mindset towards training, choosing to overhaul was probably the best thing that we could have done. So the final two blocks leading into the meet, we drastically simplified his deadlift training. On his secondary deadlift day on Tuesday, he would have a 2 count pause deadlifts, top set of 5, and then some back down 5s. Followed by on Friday, he would have a top single and then a triple at a given RPE, and then some more back down triples that are paused a little bit after that. And what this overhaul did was that it almost provided Anthony a little bit of a clean slate mentally to approach his deadlift. He had almost been spiraling down into regression for the past couple blocks, and he almost needed somewhat of a mental reset. Upon making this change, we almost immediately saw Anthony's deadlift start to pick up steam again, and he actually was able to pull an all-time PR on the platform, significantly more than what he was able to pull just 2 months before. Now, tapering Anthony was extremely simple. All we really needed to do was just line his primary days up with meet day, which was a Friday. He'd already benched on Friday and deadlifted on Friday, so we would almost be able to train into the meet, and he would typically take his primary squat on a Saturday, so all we really had to do was just move his secondary squat day up one day. So with squat and deadlift, we almost changed nothing, essentially just letting him run that final week of training as is, only pulling back on one set with his belt squats. And as I said before, the strategy that we took for tapering bench almost came as a happy accident from the block prior, where he was benching a little bit less and he actually showed up a lot stronger. So we essentially just ran with that. Now, looking at the attempt sheet, Anthony was expected to have an extremely large meet PR. Our plan A squat was to finish around 170 kilos or 374 pounds, which would be a 15 kilo meet PR. Our plan A bench was to end at around 102.5 kilos or 226 pounds, which would have been a 7.5 kilo meet PR. And then his planned third on deadlift was 200 kilos or 440 pounds, which would have been a 10 kilo meet PR. The final block of Anthony's training showed up extremely strong, and even his plan C third attempts would still yield him a pretty big meet PR. So we were fairly confident that he would have a pretty good meet. So starting with squat, Anthony opens with 152.5 kilos, which was only 2.5 under his meet PR, and he moves it extremely well. His warm-ups were flying. He was hitting depth on all of them, and we were pretty confident we were going to have a good day. But things happen on meet day, and Anthony wasn't able to sink this squat enough, and he gets called for 2 red lights, missing off of depth. But, the lift still went extremely well, and we decided to jump 2.5 kilos to 155 kilos just to secure matching his meet PR. Going into the second, we knew that Anthony was definitely strong enough to squat this well. We just kind of needed to reinforce the fact that he needed to sink it, which he does, and he gets 2 white lights, having that third red light being on depth. But we're still looking pretty strong. The lift moved extremely well, and we jumped the plan 7.5 kilos to 162.5 kilos. Now, looking at this lift, the problem wasn't necessarily that he wasn't going to be strong enough for it. The problem was just going to be if he was going to hit depth or not. From this angle, I would say that he hit depth, but from the side judges' angles, clearly he didn't, and he gets 2 red lights, missing his third attempt, only going 1 for 3 on squat. So after a bit of an unfortunate showing on squats, the goal was really just to go 6 for 6 for the rest of the day and finish the day strong. Anthony was used to benching on a Rogue bench, which was a little bit of an adjustment benching on an Eleiko on meet day, but it seemed like with his warm-ups, he was moving pretty well. Now, the issue with this opener was just that he got an extremely long start command just because his elbows were a tad bit soft, and we tried to fix that on the second just by making sure that he wasn't retracting too much. But this opener moves just a little bit slow, so we take a 2.5 jump to 95 kilos, just matching his meet PR. On the second attempt, Anthony does a little bit of a better job at not retracting his shoulder blades too hard, so his elbows stay a little bit more straight, and he gets a fair start command. This attempt moved pretty well, and we decided just to jump 2.5 kilos just to play it safe so that he can secure 3 for 3 on bench on the day. Now, we were fairly confident about his third attempt at 97.5 kilos. This is something that he said before in the gym multiple times, so we knew that, it might be a little bit hard, but he wouldn't necessarily have a problem. Now, the issue with this attempt was that apparently his wrist straps were touching the bar, which I didn't see, which the TC before sending us out also didn't see, and he actually had to re-rack it after holding it out there for around 7 to 10 seconds. He didn't really know what was going on, neither did I, and the refs didn't really make it clear what was going on until there was about 10 seconds left, and Anthony doesn't really know what to do. He takes his wrist straps off just to try and bench it, but by this time it was around 5 seconds left on the clock, and He unracks it, tries to set up normally, but just barely misses the time and times out. This definitely could have been our fault, and this definitely could have been prevented just if we knew that this was the call that they were going to make. But, you know, unfortunately, the refs didn't really communicate that with us in an adequate amount of time, and we were left almost just sitting there scrambling for 30 seconds, not really knowing what was going on, and then didn't really have enough time for that third attempt to actually get an attempt in. So unfortunately, only 2 for 3 on bench, matching his meet PR at 95 kilos, and again, just adding on to a day that was already pretty uneventful. So after everything that had happened on bench and squat, Anthony was already pretty upset with how the day had gone. And all we really wanted to do was just finish the day off 3 for 3 with potentially a deadlift PR, since deadlift had already gone so poorly in training. He opens with 180 kilos, which is only 10 kilos less than his meet PR, and he absolutely blows it up. So we take the planned jump to jump 12.5 kilos to 192.5, which would be a 2.5 kilo meet PR. We're feeling a little bit more confident now with his second attempt. He pulls it and it moves extremely well. Definitely just a little bit of form breakdown, but still definitely a lot faster than anything we had seen in training. But unfortunately, he gets 2 red lights. Upon asking the judges, they gave him red lights for hitching, which in my opinion, I did not see whatsoever. It seemed like it was a pretty clean lift. But at this point, we had already been pretty fed up with the judging, and we were already a little bit defeated. You know, I asked Anthony whether or not it was worth it to almost save the day, and he just said he wanted to pull for an all-time PR. So we jumped 2.5 kilos to 195 kilos for a 2.5 kilo all-time PR. With a third attempt, I didn't really give Anthony many instructions. I kind of just wanted him to pull it, and he pulls it extremely clean. Doesn't really look like there's any hitching whatsoever, and he gets 3 white lights, finishing the day with a 5 kilo meet PR on deadlifts and a 2.5 kilo all-time PR, but definitely still not the day that he had planned. So the biggest takeaway from this meet really was just to be undeniable. Obviously, there were some calls that we didn't necessarily agree with, and there were some decisions made by the reffing that was a little bit questionable at times, but all the other competitors were subject to the exact same reffing, and they didn't seem like they necessarily had a problem with it. So what we really need to do going into next meet was really just to make sure that there was no room for error, and there was no room for poor judging or other mistakes to almost ruin our day. This was definitely one of the more rough meet preps for Anthony, with his strength not really even showing up until that final block of training, but he still persevered through. He still showed up every single day. Incredibly proud and grateful that he continues to trust me, even though his numbers had regressed a pretty substantial amount. But through his communication and his willingness to almost try anything, we were able to get his numbers back up to all-time PR territory. But we just couldn't really piece it together on meet day. Immediately after the meet, Anthony actually signed up for another meet, and we're going to try and get a redemption come September. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.